House Above the Grave. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Move-In. Sarah's excitement was palpable as we pulled up to the curb in front of the old house. It stood tall, its Victorian architecture casting an eerie shadow in the dimming light of dusk. She squeezed my hand, her eyes wide with anticipation, as if the house itself held some kind of enchantment. "This is it, Mark," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and excitement. Our new home. I couldn't deny the charm of the place. Despite its age, the house had an undeniable appeal, with its grand porch and intricate woodwork. But as I glanced up at the weathered facade, a shiver ran down my body, a nagging feeling tugging at the back of my mind. We unloaded the last of our boxes from the moving truck, the air thick with anticipation. Sarah practically skipped up the front steps, eager to explore every nook and cranny of our new abode. I followed behind, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. As we stepped through the threshold, a musty scent greeted us, mingling with the dust motes that danced in the dim light. Sarah's eyes sparkled with excitement as she took in the grand foyer, her footsteps echoing against the hardwood floors. "It's perfect, Mark," she breathed, her hand reaching out to touch the intricately carved banister. "Can you believe we get to live here?" I forced a smile, trying to push aside the sense of foreboding that clung to the edges of my consciousness. But as we began to unpack our belongings, strange occurrences began to unfold. Objects seemed to move of their own accord, sliding across tabletops and shelves when we weren't looking. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and contorting into sinister shapes. And in the dead of night, eerie whispers echoed through the halls, their words too faint to decipher, but filled with an unmistakable malice. Sarah brushed off these occurrences with a nervous laugh, attributing them to the quirks of an old house. But try as I might, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked within the walls of our new home. As the night wore on, I found myself tossing and turning in bed, the weight of unease pressing down upon me. And as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that our new home held secrets far darker than we could ever imagine. Chapter 2. Unearthly Whispers. The sun had set, casting the old house into darkness, as Sarah and I settled into our new bedroom. Exhausted from a day of unpacking, I welcomed the comfort of our bed, hoping to drift off into a peaceful sleep. But as I closed my eyes, a soft murmur filled the room, barely audible, yet unmistakably present. I frowned, the sound pulling me from the brink of slumber. "Do you hear that, Sarah?" I whispered, turning to face her in the darkness. Her brow furrowed as she strained to listen, her eyes wide with apprehension. "The whispers," she murmured, her voice barely above a breath. "They're back." I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the faint rustle of leaves outside our window. "I don't hear anything, Sarah," I said, trying to reassure her. "It's probably just the wind rattling the old house." But Sarah shook her head, her gaze fixed on the wall, as if searching for the source of the mysterious murmurs. "No, Mark," she insisted, her voice tinged with desperation. "These whispers aren't natural. They're coming from inside the walls." I reached out to comfort her, but she recoiled, her eyes wild with fear. "You have to believe me, Mark," she pleaded, her voice trembling with uncertainty. I'm not imagining this. I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But as the whispers grew louder and more insistent, doubt crept into the corners of my mind. Perhaps Sarah was simply stressed from the move, her mind playing tricks on her in the darkness of our new home. But as the nights wore on, the whispers became impossible to ignore. They echoed through the halls, filling the house with an unearthly cacophony that made my body tremble. And with each passing day, Sarah's paranoia grew, her eyes haunted by the fear of what lurked within the walls. I tried to reassure her, to convince her that there was nothing to fear. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play. And as Sarah's grip on reality began to slip, I knew that our new home held secrets far darker than we could ever imagine. Chapter 3. The Hidden Room. The whispers had become a constant presence in our lives, their eerie murmurs filling the air with a sense of unease. Sarah's paranoia had reached a fever pitch, her eyes haunted by the fear of what lurked within the walls of our new home. Desperate for answers, she had begun to explore every corner of the house, searching for any clue to the source of the unearthly whispers. It was on a dreary afternoon that Sarah's curiosity led her to the basement, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. With each step down the creaking staircase, a sense of foreboding settled over me, as if some unseen force lurked in the shadows below. Sarah's flashlight pierced the darkness, casting long, twisted shadows along the walls as she searched for any sign of the whisper's origin. And then she saw a faint glimmer of light emanating from behind a crumbling brick wall. With trembling hands, Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the bricks. And then, with a resounding crack, the wall gave way, revealing a hidden room concealed behind layers of dust and decay. My heart pounded in my chest as we stepped into the room, the air thick with the weight of years gone by. Dust motes danced in the faint light, swirling around us like phantoms as Sarah's flashlight illuminated the space. It was as if time had stood still within the confines of the hidden room. Old photographs lined the walls, their faded images capturing moments long forgotten. Newspaper clippings littered the floor, their yellowed pages recounting the tragic history of the house. As Sarah sifted through the relics of the past, a sense of dread settled over me, as if the very walls themselves were closing in around us. And then I saw a photograph tucked away in the corner, its edges frayed with age. I reached out to touch the photograph, my fingers trembling as I traced the faces captured within its frame. And then I recoiled in horror as I realized the truth. The faces in the photograph were ours, Sarah and I, staring back at us with hollow eyes filled with despair. A shiver ran down my soul as I glanced around the room, the walls closing in around us with each passing moment. And then, with a sudden jolt, the whispers returned, their voices rising to a deafening crescendo that echoed through the darkness. Sarah's eyes widened with fear as she looked to me for reassurance, but I had none to offer. For in that moment, as we stood trapped within the confines of the hidden room, I knew that our new home held secrets far darker than we could ever imagine. Chapter 4. Visions of the Past. The night air hung heavy with the weight of Sarah's unease. As we settled into bed, the darkness pressing in around us like a suffocating blanket. But as I drifted into a fitful sleep, I was unaware of the horrors that awaited Sarah in the depths of her dreams. Vivid nightmares plagued her nights, twisting and contorting reality into a grotesque tableau of unspeakable horrors. She saw glimpses of a family that had lived in the house generations ago, their faces contorted with fear as they were consumed by darkness. In her dreams, Sarah watched helplessly as the family fell victim to unseen forces, their screams echoing through the halls as they were dragged into the depths of despair. She saw faces twisted with agony, eyes wide with terror as they begged for mercy that would never come. But it wasn't just nightmares that plagued Sarah's waking hours. Hallucinations gripped her mind, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare as she saw visions of past events unfolding before her eyes. She saw the family that had once called the house home, their faces etched with sorrow as they wandered the halls in search of escape. She saw children huddled in corners, their eyes wide with terror as they whispered secrets too terrible to comprehend. With each passing day, Sarah's grip on reality grew more tenuous, her mind consumed by the horrors that lurked within the walls of our new home. She became obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the house's dark past, poring over old photographs and newspaper clippings in search of answers. But the more she uncovered, the deeper she fell into the abyss of madness, her mind consumed by the darkness that lurked within the shadows. And as the whispers grew louder and more insistent, I knew that we were teetering on the brink of something far more sinister than we could ever imagine. Chapter 5. Haunted by the Dead. The once quaint and charming house had transformed into a crucible of terror, its walls echoing with the malevolent whispers of the past. Every corner seemed to hold a shadowy secret, every room haunted by the specters of those who had come before us. The supernatural activity escalated with each passing day, no longer content to remain confined to the realm of whispers and hallucinations. Objects moved of their own accord, sliding across tabletops and shelves with an otherworldly force. Shadowy figures lurked in the corners, their forms shifting and contorting into grotesque shapes that scared us all. Sarah and I found ourselves teetering on the edge of sanity, our once strong bond strained to the breaking point by the weight of fear that pressed down upon us. We snapped at each other over trivial matters, our nerves frayed by the constant barrage of terror that assailed us from all sides. Desperate for answers, we reached out to a paranormal investigator, a man rumored to have experience with the supernatural. But as he stepped through the threshold of our haunted home, his face paled with dread. "This house is cursed," he warned us, his voice barely above a whisper. "The spirits that haunt these halls are not content to remain silent. They seek vengeance for past wrongs, and they will not rest until they have claimed their due." His words scared me, confirming the fears that had gnawed at the edges of my consciousness since we first set foot in this accursed place. But Sarah refused to back down, her eyes burning with determination as she demanded answers. "We need to know what happened here," she insisted, her voice tinged with desperation. "We need to understand why these spirits are haunting us." The paranormal investigator hesitated, his gaze flickering to the shadows that danced along the walls. "There are some things that are better left buried," he warned us. "But if you insist on delving into the past, be prepared for what you may uncover." With a heavy heart, we followed him into the depths of the house, each step bringing us closer to the truth that lurked within the shadows. And as we delved deeper into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives would never be the same again. Chapter 6. Descent into Madness. As the haunting within the old house intensified, so too did Sarah's descent into madness. What had once been a spark of curiosity had now become a raging inferno of fear and paranoia, consuming her from within as the shadows of the past closed in around her. I watched helplessly as Sarah's once bright eyes grew dull with terror, her laughter replaced by the hollow echo of despair. She became consumed by hallucinations, her mind unable to distinguish between reality and illusion as the ghosts of the past whispered their secrets into her ears. I tried to comfort her, to reassure her that everything would be all right, but my words fell on deaf ears. She was lost in a world of her own making. I reached out to the paranormal investigator for help, desperate for any shred of hope that could pull Sarah back from the brink of madness. But his words offered little solace, his warnings echoing in my mind like a death knell. "She is trapped in a nightmare of her own making," he told me, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The spirits that haunt this house have claimed her as their own, and there is little we can do to save her." But I refused to give up hope. I refused to let Sarah slip away into the darkness without a fight. And so I stayed by her side, holding her close as she trembled with fear, whispering words of comfort into the darkness that threatened to consume her. But as the days stretched into weeks, I watched helplessly as Sarah's grip on reality slipped further and further away. She became a shell of her former self, her eyes vacant and hollow as she wandered the halls in search of answers that would never come. And in those moments of despair, I felt a creeping sense of guilt gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. Guilt for bringing Sarah into this nightmare. Guilt for failing to protect her from the horrors that lurked within the shadows. But as I looked into her eyes, I saw a flicker of something familiar, a glimmer of the woman I loved, buried beneath the weight of fear and despair. And so, I vowed to fight for her, to do whatever it took to bring her back from the brink of madness, even if it meant facing the darkness that lurked within the walls of our haunted home. Chapter 7. Confronting the Evil. Sarah's determination to uncover the truth was unwavering, her mind consumed by the need to confront the malevolent force that lurked within the walls of our haunted home. She delved deeper into the history of the house, scouring old records and newspaper clippings for any clue that could shed light on the darkness that plagued us. And then, buried deep within the annals of time, she found it, the dark secret that had been hidden for centuries, a secret so terrible that it sent shivers down my body. The house had been built upon a foundation of blood and suffering, its very walls infused with the malevolent energy of a vengeful entity that had been trapped within its confines for generations. It fed off the souls of those who dwelled within its walls, twisting their minds and driving them to madness in its insatiable quest for power. Sarah's hands trembled as she uncovered the truth, her eyes wide with horror as she realized the magnitude of the evil that we had unwittingly unleashed. But instead of succumbing to despair, she steeled herself with a newfound resolve, determined to rid the house of its malevolent presence once and for all. With grim determination, Sarah confronted the entity head-on, her voice ringing out through the darkness as she called upon the spirits of the past to aid her in her quest for justice. Shadows danced around her, their forms shifting and contorting into grotesque shapes as the malevolent force within the house stirred to life. But Sarah stood firm, her eyes blazing with determination as she faced down the darkness that threatened to consume us all. With every ounce of strength she possessed, she called upon the spirits of the past to aid her in her quest, their voices echoing through the halls in a chorus of defiance. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the entity was vanquished, its malevolent presence banished from the house forever. As the darkness receded, Sarah collapsed to the floor, her body racked with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. I knelt by her side, relief flooding through me as I realized that we had finally rid the house of its evil presence. But as I looked into Sarah's eyes, I knew that the battle was far from over. For even though we had vanquished the darkness that lurked within the walls of our haunted home, the scars it had left behind would remain with us forever. Chapter 8. The Ritual. With the malevolent entity banished, Sarah was determined to ensure that the darkness would never return to haunt our home. She sought out the help of a local psychic, a woman rumored to possess knowledge of ancient rituals capable of banishing even the most powerful of spirits. Together, we gathered the necessary materials for the ritual, our hands trembling as we prepared to confront the darkness that still lingered within the shadows. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the old house into darkness, we lit candles and arranged them in a circle around us, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows upon the walls. The psychic began to chant, her voice low and melodic, as she called upon the spirits of the earth to aid us in our quest. Sarah joined in, her voice blending with the psychic's in a haunting chorus that echoed through the empty halls. As we performed the ritual, the house began to shake violently, as if the very foundations were crumbling beneath our feet. Shadows danced along the walls, their forms twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes as malevolent spirits manifested all around us. With a cry of despair, the psychic fell to her knees, her strength faltering as the darkness closed in around us. But Sarah stood firm, her eyes blazing with determination as she faced down the forces of evil that threatened to consume us. I watched in awe as Sarah unleashed a power I had never seen before, her voice ringing out through the darkness as she commanded the spirits to leave our home. With every word she spoke, the shadows began to recede, their grip on the house weakening with each passing moment. But just as it seemed that victory was within our grasp, the darkness surged forth with renewed fury, its malevolent presence threatening to overwhelm us. Sarah and I fought side by side, our hearts filled with determination as we battled against the forces of evil that sought to destroy us. With every ounce of strength we possessed, we pushed back against the darkness, refusing to let it claim us as its victims. And then, with a final burst of energy, we unleashed a wave of pure light that banished the darkness from our home once and for all. As the last echoes of the ritual faded into the night, Sarah and I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but triumphant. We had faced down the forces of darkness and emerged victorious, our bond stronger than ever as we stood together against the horrors that lurked within the shadows. Chapter 9. Race Against Time. The candles flickered ominously as Sarah and I stood in the center of the makeshift ritual circle, the air thick with anticipation as we prepared to banish the evil that still lingered within the walls of our home. Time seemed to stretch endlessly before us, each moment ticking by with agonizing slowness as we raced against the clock to complete the ritual before it was too late. But even as we began the incantation, we could feel the malevolent presence of the entity lurking just beyond the edges of our consciousness, its dark energy swirling around us like a sinister maelstrom. With every word we spoke, it fought back with all its power, throwing obstacle after obstacle in our path as it sought to thwart our efforts. We faced numerous setbacks as we struggled to maintain our focus amidst the chaos that surrounded us. Objects flew through the air with deadly accuracy, narrowly missing us as we dodged and weaved through the onslaught. Shadows writhed and contorted, their forms twisting into grotesque shapes as they reached out to ensnare us in their grasp. But we refused to back down, our determination unyielding as we pressed forward against the forces of darkness. With every setback, we redoubled our efforts, our voices rising in a defiant chorus as we fought to overcome the obstacles that stood in our way. The tension reached its peak as we neared the culmination of the ritual, our hearts pounding in our chests as we struggled to stay alive long enough to banish the darkness once and for all. Time seemed to stand still as we chanted the final words of the incantation, our voices trembling with the weight of our determination. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the ritual reached its climax, the darkness recoiling in horror as the pure energy of our combined willpower surged forth to vanquish it from our home. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath as the malevolent presence dissipated into the ether, leaving behind only the echoes of its defeat. We collapsed to the ground, exhausted but victorious, our bodies trembling with the exertion of our efforts. As we caught our breath, we looked at each other with relief and gratitude, knowing that we had faced down the forces of darkness and emerged triumphant. But even as we celebrated our victory, we knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness may have been banished from our home, but its legacy would linger on, a reminder of the horrors that we had faced and the strength that we had found within ourselves to overcome them. And as we stood together in the aftermath of the ritual, we knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our determination to protect each other from the darkness that lurked within the shadows. Chapter 10. The Final Confrontation. The air crackled with tension as Sarah and I stood face to face with the entity in its true form, our hearts pounding in our chests as we prepared for the final showdown. The darkness seemed to pulse and swirl around us, its malevolent energy suffocating in its intensity as it sought to claim us for its own. With a steely resolve, we braced ourselves for the battle ahead, knowing that our strength and courage would be tested like never before. We locked eyes with the entity, its form shifting and contorting into a grotesque semblance of humanity as it prepared to unleash its full fury upon us. But we refused to back down, our determination unyielding as we stood our ground against the darkness that threatened to consume us. With a primal roar, we launched ourselves into the fray, our fists flying as we struck out against the entity with all the strength we could muster. The battle was fierce and brutal, each blow reverberating through the darkness as we fought tooth and nail to defeat our foe. The entity fought back with all its power, its tendrils of darkness lashing out at us with deadly accuracy as it sought to crush us beneath its heel. But we refused to be intimidated, our spirits unbroken as we continued to press forward against the onslaught. With every ounce of strength and courage we possessed, we fought back against the darkness, determined to save ourselves from its grasp no matter the cost. The battle raged on, the sounds of our struggle echoing through the empty halls as we clashed with the entity in a desperate bid for survival. The fate of our souls hung in the balance, our every move guided by a fierce determination to emerge victorious against all odds. And then, with a final burst of energy, we unleashed a wave of pure light that engulfed the entity in its entirety, banishing it from our home once and for all. As the darkness dissipated into the ether, we collapsed to the ground, exhausted but triumphant, our bodies battered and bruised, but our spirits unbroken. As we caught our breath, we looked at each other with relief and gratitude, knowing that we had faced down the forces of darkness and emerged victorious. The battle may have been fierce, but our bond had proven stronger, and together we had triumphed against all odds. And as we stood together in the aftermath of the final confrontation, we knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our determination to protect each other from the darkness that lurked within the shadows. Chapter 11. Closure. With the entity finally vanquished, a sense of peace settled over our home like a comforting blanket, the once oppressive darkness replaced by a warm, comforting light. Sarah and I stood in the center of the now tranquil house, our hearts filled with a sense of relief and gratitude as we reflected on the harrowing ordeal that had brought us to this moment. The journey had been long and fraught with peril, but we had emerged victorious, our bond stronger than ever before. As we looked around at the familiar surroundings of our home, we couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at how much we had overcome together. We sat together on the worn couch in the living room, the flickering light of the fireplace casting dancing shadows across the walls as we shared a moment of quiet reflection. The events of the past weeks seemed like a distant memory now, a surreal nightmare that we had somehow managed to survive. But even as we reflected on the darkness that had once threatened to consume us, we couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the strength and courage that had carried us through. Our ordeal had changed us forever, leaving us scarred but wiser, stronger, and closer than ever before. As we sat together in the warm glow of the fire, we talked about the lessons we had learned along the way, the importance of facing our fears head-on, the power of love and friendship in the face of adversity, and the resilience of the human spirit in the darkest of times. And though the memories of our ordeal would always linger in the corners of our minds, we knew that they would not define us. Instead, they would serve as a reminder of the strength and courage that lay within us, a testament to our ability to overcome even the greatest of challenges. As we embraced each other in the fading light of the fire, we knew that our journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more trials to face and overcome. But as long as we had each other, we knew that we could weather any storm that came our way. And so, with hearts full of gratitude and hope for the future, we stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage, strength, and the unwavering knowledge that together we could overcome anything. Chapter 12, Epilogue. Years had passed since our harrowing ordeal in the old house, but the memories of those dark days still lingered in the corners of our minds, like ghosts refusing to be forgotten. Sarah and I had moved on with our lives, finding solace in the ordinary routines of everyday life. But the scars left behind by our time in the house were a constant reminder of the horrors we had endured. As we sat together on the porch of our new home, the warm breeze carrying the scent of flowers and freshly cut grass, we couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The memories of our time in the old house seemed like a distant dream now, a surreal nightmare that we had somehow managed to survive. But even as we looked back on those dark days, we knew that they had changed us in ways we could never fully comprehend. The scars may have healed, but the wounds left behind by our ordeal were a constant reminder of the strength and courage that had carried us through. We talked about the challenges we had faced and the lessons we had learned along the way, the importance of facing our fears head-on, the power of love and friendship in the face of adversity, and the resilience of the human spirit in the darkest of times. And though the memories of our time in the old house still haunted us, we were grateful for each other and the unwavering support that had carried us through even the darkest of nights. Our bond had been tested in ways we could never have imagined, but in the end, it had emerged stronger than ever before. As we looked out at the world stretching out before us, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, we knew that our journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more trials to face and overcome. But as long as we had each other, we knew that we could weather any storm that came our way. And so, with hearts full of gratitude and hope for the future, we stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage, strength, and the unwavering knowledge that together we could overcome anything.